tarde, pessoal. Meu nome é Aline Lopes, eu sou pesquisadora do Instituto Liberdade Digital. E hoje eu estou aqui com uma convidada super especial para falar sobre os impactos da criptografia na comunidade LGBTQIA+. Vem com a gente! A Anna Higgins é coordenadora de projetos Internet Society, uma organização internacional sem fins lucrativos que luta pela democratização de uma internet aberta, confiável, globalmente conectada e segura. A gente convidou a Ana para conversar um pouquinho sobre uma iniciativa muito legal entre o Internet Society e a LGBTQ, que é uma organização norte-americana que desenvolve programas e iniciativas que visam atender as necessidades específicas da comunidade LGBTQIA+, no ambiente digital. A Ana foi uma das mentes por trás de um dos resultados dessa parceria, uma cartilha maravilhosa, trazendo informações bem legais sobre como a criptografia é importante para a segurança de comunidades LGBTQIA+, na internet. Em homenagem ao mês do orgulho LGBTQIA+, a gente aqui do Instituto Liberdade Digital, em parceria com o capítulo brasileiro da Internet Society, teve o prazer de traduzir esse material para o português e receber a Ana para uma conversa. Bora lá? So, Anna, I had the pleasure of being one of the people involved with the translation of the fact sheet, and I learned a lot. My main theme of study in the Institute is not encryption, so from a purely technical point of view, it was already super informative. But being a member of the LGBTQIA+ community, it gave me another layer of understanding and impact. So I think my first question is, why make that content? What were the inspiration and aspiration of the content? And if you could tell us a little bit about the process of creation and the impact of the material.
Yeah, absolutely. So like you mentioned, encryption is highly technical. It's a lot of math at the end of the day. And at the Internet Society, we tend to advocate for encryption on two fronts. So we have that technical side. We have technical experts in-house who know about, quantum computing and its effects on encryption and all of these really technical topics. But the other side of encryption is the human side of it. How does it affect people day to day? And I think that it's really important to tap into that human side and that human element because, when you are advocating, technical arguments only go so far before they start to kind of go over people's heads. And so it's really important to bring in that human side as well. And, I think that the answer of why encryption is important to people in general is it's not totally obvious, but it's kind of obvious. It's just for personal security in general. And, beyond that, there are a lot of communities where the importance of encryption manifests in very specific ways. There are communities that encryption is important to them for very specific purposes. And the LGBTQ+ community is one of those. And so we started working with LGBT Tech, I want to say it was in the fall of 2019. We were organizing a briefing on Capitol Hill for US Congress on, the technical and the human side of encryption. And we recognized that the LGBTQ+ community is a community that really benefits from it. It's a community that is vulnerable, but also really relies on being able to use the internet to connect with other people in the community, to connect with trusted healthcare providers. And so we are not the experts on what technology means to the LGBTQ+ community. We can recognize that it's important, but we're not the experts at the end of the day. And so we began working with LGBT Tech because they are the experts. And that is what they work on. That is their bread and butter. And so our partnership with them has been so wonderful and so productive. And we actually, after the briefing that we did, we developed a fact sheet with them where we laid out, what encryption is, why it's important to the community in words. And then we started thinking, especially with COVID last year, it's even more important to people now because people are spending so much more of their lives online when you can't meet in person. And so we thought it would be really wonderful to reach out to LGBT Tech again and see if they would want to make some more, I would say, engaging content that is a little bit more pleasing to the eye, and you can look at, nice infographics and pictures, and you can also get a visual representation of what encryption looks like, because I think having that visual component when you're not a technical person is also really important. So we chatted with LGBT Tech and we said, we're really interested in, putting some money behind an infographic if you all are interested in developing it. And they said, yes, absolutely. And of course, we have a lot of technical experts in-house. Like I mentioned, we have a lot of expertise there. And so, we were able to, at this point, they know so much about encryption, but we were able to, give a little bit of insight on more technical issues, and they are the experts on the human side. And so I think that when you have the expertise on this technical and the human side, and you can bring it together, you can make a product that is really informative and engaging and really effective when it comes to advocacy.
That's really interesting. We tried to push a little bit on the infographic and making sure it was more visually appealing too on our side, and I think it looked really pretty the way you guys did it, so we used it as inspiration for the way we did it, and that's really awesome. The second question I have for you is, what do you think are the most important aspects of securing a safe environment to minority groups on the internet? We know the internet right now is a wonderful place where you can connect to people you would otherwise not have in your life, and a way to have access to way more information than I had to when I was coming out. So that's already amazing, but with that openness, we might open ourselves to malicious intentions too. So for the younger generations taking their first steps into technology, what would be your advice to them?
Yes, so there's a lot there. First of all, use encrypted services. Obviously, use encrypted services because encrypted services ensure that only you and the person you're trying to talk to can access your conversations. So, if it's something sensitive like coming out, that's information you clearly want protected. If it's, talking to your doctor about, your health concerns and you are transgender or something, that's also really, you have to keep that protected. That's so important. And then also when it comes to, I think all over the world, I have the most knowledge about the US because it's where I'm based, but there's still some discrimination that's legal in states against, housing and employment for being part of the LGBTQ plus community. So obviously, you want to keep that information really private and secure because you don't want to be discriminated against for housing and employment and all those other things. But so that would be my first piece of advice. Use end-to-end encrypted apps whenever you can. Use Signal, WhatsApp, iMessage. Those are all end-to-end encrypted. And then, if you have the option to turn on encryption for your devices or services, do that. Some devices or services will offer encryption, but it's not set as the default. And sometimes you might have to jump through a few extra hoops to, have the encryption. So for example, Zoom has an end-to-end encryption option now. There are a few limitations to it, I would say. There's a few rules around it, and I'm not totally sure what all of those are. But just be conscious of what services you have that could use end-to-end encryption. And then it's also, this is going to sound like just basic internet hygiene, but encryption is only as good as the other security measures that you implement. So, pay attention to your basic digital hygiene. So use strong passwords. Don't use a default password. Don't use password 123 or anything like that. And make sure that you have a password manager of some kind, a secure password manager. So that way you're not using the same password for every single website or account that you have. It's also important to keep up with updates on your computer. Updates on your computer or on your phone, I think we often think of them as bringing cool new features, and it's kind of a hassle. You have to sit there for a long time and you can't use your computer for a long time, but these updates are also meant to fix security vulnerabilities. So make sure that you're keeping up with those updates because that will help you out in the long run. And then whenever you can, turn on two-factor authentication. This just adds another factor to your usual login process. So for example, you might go to log into a website and then it'll send you a text and it says it has a code, and then you just have to plug in the code to the website and then you're in. So it's more than just your username and password. It's also making sure it's actually you who's logging in. And one last thing is to turn on erase data options. So some smartphones and services have an option that will erase your data after a certain number of failed attempts to get into your phone or a service or an application. So you can turn this on to protect yourself if someone steals your phone or your laptop. So just to make sure that they can't get your data in the long run.
That's really cool to hear, and I feel better because I realize that I do all those things, so I already feel safe. I have one last question for you, and it's about encryption. Here on the Institute, we're working with encryption through a project called Encode. Basically, what we're trying to do is learn the perspective on encryption of actors from different sectors of society in hopes we can address their needs and explore the solutions that they bring for a broad audience that might not be as invested in the team. We already went through a misinformation cycle, and we're now going through a public security cycle. So I would like to hear your thoughts on the biggest challenges surrounding encryption today. How mature is the debate, and what can we do to help popularize the conversation and bring it to groups that are affected, like the LGBTQIA+ community?
Absolutely. And again, I'll preface this by saying that a lot of my perspective comes from the United States, just because that's where I'm based and that's kind of where I keep up with encryption the most. But I think one big threat that we're seeing to encryption in the past few years is that the government and law enforcement mostly is calling for the implementation of backdoors, which we sometimes call government access or exceptional access. And that's basically when the government requires keys to access encrypted data. The issue there is that if a backdoor exists, then there's no way to ensure that only the good guys can get in. And so you could be giving yourself access to companies and services that are required to put in these backdoors could also be giving access not just to the government and law enforcement, but also to, potential bad actors who could get into your conversations as well. So that's a big threat that we're seeing. And that has been a really, I would say, tricky conversation to navigate. I'm not an expert on law enforcement and how they do their investigations and solve their cases, but there have been a lot of arguments, I would say, in the civil society space saying that encryption is not necessary for law enforcement to solve cases. There are other things they could be doing that would be just as, if not more helpful to get them to solve investigations without having to break encryption. But the issue is that some organizations will say that the issue is that a lot of law enforcement might not have the technical knowledge or the capability of doing technical analysis to pursue these other things. And breaking encryption is kind of the easiest way to say, here's how we can get this information that we want for our investigation. So it's tough because would breaking encryption help their investigations? I mean, I don't know. Like I said, there are other things that they can do, but at the end of the day, we're going to put everyone else in danger. So it's tough to navigate that. So that's one of the major threats that we're seeing right now. In general, for internet society, we are absolutely pro end-to-end encryption. And when it comes to advocating for it and making sure people in vulnerable communities are aware of how important it is to them, I think things just like social media is really important for spreading information like that. I think that, I think that in the past year or two, at least in the United States, I think a lot of young people have become more and more attuned to, you know, how their information is protected on different applications. And I think to a degree, it's kind of like word of mouth, you know, telling your friends, you know, text me on Signal, text me on WhatsApp, and, you know, changing the way that you do your communications and, you know, talk to your community is important, and that can, you know, influence the people around you. So I think, you know, going on social media and you know, advocating for these things with your community is really important. It's also one more thing. It's really important to stay informed. So important to stay informed. Tell others in your community and take action. You know, make sure that you're using these applications whenever you can. And, you know, if you are communicating with a friend who you know is in a vulnerable community, communicate with them through the encrypted docs.
That's really cool. I think that's pretty much the questions I've had for you today. I want to thank you again for being so open and available to us, and I hope we can join efforts some other time with some other project. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thanks again. Obrigada, pessoal, a todos.